A grieving son discovers his mother's body was sold for military blast testing. A man's mind begins to unravel, all because of a blurry lamp. And a charming fiancé turns into a family murderer, all to protect a web of lies. These aren't movie plots. These are true stories, and they're more disturbing than fiction. Sometimes, the real world is darker, stranger, and more unpredictable than anything we could imagine. In this episode, we reveal 3 true stories that challenge trust, test sanity, and expose how far some people will go to preserve illusion. From medical betrayal to psychological collapse to cold-blooded crime, each tale pulls back the curtain on the hidden horrors of everyday life. You won't believe these stories are real until you hear them for yourself. Jim Stoffer's tragic discovery, the Biological Resource Center scandal. The body donation industry has been marred by several high-profile scandals in recent years, shedding light on the lack of regulation and oversight in the handling of donated human remains. While the idea of body donation to science is often perceived as an altruistic act, some dark secrets have emerged, casting a shadow over the practice and revealing its vulnerabilities. Among these, the Biological Resource Center (BRC) scandal stands out as one of the most shocking and tragic stories. In 2014, the FBI raided the Biological Resource Center (BRC) in Phoenix, Arizona, uncovering a disturbing scene. Investigators found buckets filled with human heads, limbs, and genitalia, as well as a torso with a head sewn onto it in a Frankenstein manner. The facility had been selling body parts to the military for blast testing without the consent of the donors or their families. This discovery was a severe violation of both legal and ethical standards, revealing the extent of exploitation within the body donation industry. The BRC had deceived families, such as Jim Stoffer's, who thought they were donating bodies for legitimate scientific purposes. The center had been involved in selling donated bodies for profit, taking advantage of the trust people placed in them. A key revelation came when it was uncovered that Jim's mother, who had passed away from Alzheimer's disease, was one of the victims. She had been donated to the center with the expectation that her brain would be used for Alzheimer's research, a cause that Jim believed would help future patients. However, the FBI's investigation revealed that instead of her brain being used for research, Jim's mother had been sold to the U.S. Army for a series of grotesque and inhumane experiments. She was strapped to a device that resembled a chair, and a bomb was detonated beneath her to study the effects of an IED explosion on the human body. This discovery left Jim in utter shock. The ashes that he received in the mail, supposedly from his mother's cremation, were not the remains of her entire body but only her hand. The rest of her body was unrecoverable, destroyed in the military testing. This revelation was not just a violation of Jim's mother's dignity but also a devastating betrayal of trust. The pain was amplified by the knowledge that Jim had been led to believe that his mother's remains would contribute to meaningful medical research, only to find out that her body had been exploited for military experiments. The emotional impact on Jim and the other families affected by the scandal was profound. In interviews, Jim spoke of the overwhelming sense of betrayal and grief that followed the revelation. His mother had entrusted her body to science to help others, but instead, her remains were used in a manner that he described as disrespectful and inhumane. Jim's story was not an isolated one. He, along with 19 other families, filed a lawsuit against the Biological Resource Center, seeking justice for their loved ones whose bodies were similarly mishandled. The FBI's investigation into the BRC was not only a revelation of the unlawful sale of body parts but also an indictment of the lack of oversight in the body donation industry. The practices at the center were not limited to the sale of bodies to the military. Investigators discovered further instances of grotesque practices, such as the body of a man that had a female head sewn onto it as a trophy. These discoveries only deepened the horror for the affected families. The legal battle that ensued was long and difficult, but in 2019, the families were awarded a significant settlement of $58 million in damages. While this financial compensation could never fully heal the emotional scars left by the betrayal, it was a moment of justice for those whose loved ones had been exploited in such a horrifying way. The Biological Resource Center ceased operations after the scandal, but the damage it caused would never be fully undone. The scandal at the BRC is not just a cautionary tale about the importance of oversight in the body donation industry. It also raises larger questions about the ethical implications of body donation and the boundaries that should exist when it comes to the use of human remains. Jim's mother, along with the other donors, had made the ultimate gift, offering their bodies to advance science. In return, they received not just the loss of their physical forms but the betrayal of their intentions, a violation that has left a permanent scar on the families involved. Jim's discovery of what happened to his mother's body is a tragic and unforgettable chapter in the broader conversation about body donation. It highlights the vulnerability of human remains and the need for stricter regulations to prevent such exploitation. It also underscores the emotional toll on the families who must carry the weight of such revelations, having been deceived by institutions that were supposed to honor their loved ones' final wishes. The BRC scandal was only one in a growing list of ethical violations in the body donation industry. The lack of federal regulation and oversight has allowed a gray market for body parts to thrive, with brokers and senders profiting off donated remains without adequate transparency or accountability. Unlike organ donation, which is tightly regulated, body donation remains a largely unregulated practice, leaving donors and their families vulnerable to abuse. Special Agent Paul Micah Johnson of the FBI, who has spent over a decade investigating the body donation industry, has highlighted the ease with which brokers and senders operate without oversight. This lack of regulation has made it easy for unscrupulous individuals and companies to exploit families and profit from human remains. As a result, many people who donate their bodies for research, or in some cases, as an act of charity, find their remains sold or misused without their consent or knowledge. In response to the growing awareness of the issues within the body donation industry, documentaries like Body Brokers have emerged to shed light on the exploitation that can occur behind closed doors. These documentaries offer a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by families who donate bodies and the potential for abuse in an industry with so little regulation. For Jim Stoffer and the other families affected by the Biological Resource Center scandal, the fight for justice continues. While the legal victory provided some sense of closure, the emotional scars remain. Jim's mother, like so many others, made a choice that she believed would help humanity, but in the end, her body was used in a way that dishonored her legacy. For Jim, and others who have suffered similar fates, the fight for accountability in the body donation industry is not just about compensation, it's about ensuring that no one else has to endure what they have gone through. Mitch's hallucination, the blurry lamp that led to a mind unraveling. Mitch had always lived a life that appeared perfect to those on the outside. He had a beautiful wife, 2 lovely children, and a successful career in a growing tech company. His home was filled with laughter, the comforting hum of family life, and an overwhelming sense of normalcy. Mitch's days were predictable. He worked hard, spent time with his family, and enjoyed the peace that routine provided. But everything started to shift in a way that he couldn't understand, a subtle change that became an all-consuming obsession. It began one evening while Mitch was lounging on the couch after a long day. The red lamp in the corner of the room caught his eye. At first, it was nothing more than a strange flicker in his peripheral vision. But when Mitch turned his gaze directly to the lamp, he noticed something was off. It appeared blurry, but not in a way that seemed possible. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and tried to focus again. But the lamp remained distorted, a soft haze surrounding it that only deepened with each second. His mind immediately began to race. He wasn't prone to such odd visual anomalies. Was he getting sick? Had something gone wrong with his vision? Was he having a stroke? His thoughts spiraled. He walked closer to the lamp, his heart pounding in his chest. No matter how much he moved, adjusted, or squinted, the blurry image remained. Nothing else in the room was affected, just the lamp. That night, Mitch tried to ignore it. He convinced himself it was a minor, unexplainable glitch. Maybe he was just tired, or his eyes were playing tricks on him. The next day, however, the lamp was still there, still blurry, still unsettling. And it wasn't just blurry, it was as though it was subtly shifting in ways that felt unnatural. It turned upside down. It grew larger. The redness of the light deepened, as if it was calling to him, demanding his attention. Fear began to gnaw at Mitch. His grip on reality began to loosen. He started checking on the lamp in every spare moment, convinced it was some sign of an impending illness, a symptom of something more sinister than he could explain. Days turned into weeks, and the lamp remained just as disturbing, more so with each passing moment. His family noticed a change in him. He grew irritable, his eyes fixed on the lamp, his mind racing with questions about his own health. The playful father, the attentive husband, was slowly slipping away, replaced by a man obsessed with an inexplicable object. Mitch tried to hide his anxiety from his wife, Kayla. He didn't want her to see how much the lamp had started to dominate his thoughts. He brushed it off when she asked what was wrong, feigning tiredness or illness. But inside, he was unraveling. The more he focused on the lamp, the more convinced he became that something was deeply wrong with him. But could it really be his health, or was it something else entirely? What if his whole life was nothing more than a construct, something his mind had fabricated to shield him from a harsher reality? One night, after his family had gone to bed, Mitch ventured downstairs in the darkness. He sat on the couch, unable to tear his eyes from the lamp. Hours passed as he watched it distort and change, growing larger, shifting from one side to another. His thoughts became fragmented, more erratic. The lamp was now all he could see. His mind was consumed by it. It wasn't just a lamp anymore. It was a gateway, a symbol of everything wrong in his life. The boundaries between what was real and what was imagined began to dissolve. The next morning, he couldn't focus on anything. Kayla's concerned questions went unanswered. Mitch could no longer differentiate between what was real and what was a product of his mind. His family seemed distant to him, as though they weren't truly there, or perhaps he had never truly been there. It was as though his entire life had been one long dream, a hallucination that was now beginning to unravel. Then, a terrifying realization hit him. What if the lamp wasn't just a hallucination? What if the life he had built, the wife, the children, the house, was all part of the same illusion? Was everything around him just a distortion of his mind, a creation of his desperate need for normalcy? Mitch's mind cracked. His fear of losing his grip on reality morphed into something darker, a fear that his entire existence, the love he had for his family, the years he had spent building a life, were all a lie. He wasn't sure what was worse, the idea that he had been living a lie or the thought that he was now losing his mind. Either way, his family, his life, it all felt unreal. He couldn't trust his own senses. If the lamp wasn't real, then what about everything else? The emotional toll was brutal. Mitch's depression deepened as he tried to piece together his shattered reality. He withdrew further, unable to explain to Kayla the depth of his torment. How could he tell her that he wasn't sure whether he was still the man she had married? How could he tell her that he couldn't even trust the world around him? In a desperate attempt to hold on to something, Mitch sought help, but the therapy was slow. The realization that he had been living in a self-deception, hiding from a truth that he couldn't face, was almost more painful than the hallucinations themselves. His mind, fractured and confused, couldn't seem to find the way back to reality. Mitch's breakdown had a profound impact on his relationships. Kayla, initially supportive, grew frustrated with his withdrawal. She didn't understand why Mitch, the man she loved, seemed to have vanished. The more Mitch retreated into his mind, the more he lost his connection with her. His children, unaware of what their father was going through, noticed the change. They saw the man who had once been so full of life and joy now sinking into a quiet abyss. The path to recovery was long and uncertain. Mitch faced not only the challenge of regaining his mental stability but also the burden of grieving for a family that may never have existed. His therapy sessions were grueling, as he slowly worked through his confusion and fear. He had to learn to rebuild his life from the ground up, this time with a more grounded sense of self-awareness. But the trauma left scars that would never fully heal. The hallucinations had ended, but the emotional toll of believing in something that wasn't real, of living in a constructed world, lingered. Mitch's recovery journey was about more than just regaining his mental health. It was about learning to live with the aftermath of self-deception, accepting that reality, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could offer him true healing. The blurry lamp, once a symbol of his unraveling, had become a memory of the fragility of the mind and the strength required to confront the truth, no matter how disorienting it may be. Brett Ryan's deception, the fake bearded bandit's fall from grace. Brett Ryan, once known as the fake Bearded Bandit for his audacious bank robberies in the late 2000s, fell from grace in a way that shocked his community and left a trail of devastation in its wake. His story is one of deception, moral descent, and ultimately, tragedy. Ryan, who initially portrayed himself as a charming and well-liked individual, turned out to be hiding a web of lies, deep psychological struggles, and a growing sense of desperation that would lead to an unimaginable outcome. Ryan's troubles began long before the murders of his family in August 2016. In 2008, he was facing overwhelming financial pressures. After dropping out of college and amassing a significant amount of debt, over $60,000, he found himself living with his parents, unable to find stable work. While his peers had begun careers in medicine, finance, and other respectable fields, Ryan was struggling to make ends meet with a part-time house painting job. Despite this, he yearned for a better life, one he felt he deserved but could not reach due to his financial situation. He was torn between facing the reality of his struggles and the desire to maintain the image of success he so desperately wanted to project. Rather than addressing his debt head-on, Ryan chose a much darker path. He decided to rob banks. He cleverly disguised himself with fake beards, and it was these robberies that earned him the nickname Fake Bearded Bandit. In October 2007, he carried out his first heist. With a hospital bandage wrapped around his head and his arm in a sling, he approached a teller, handed over a note demanding $2,000, and walked out with just over $1,000. To his surprise, he wasn't caught. This initial success propelled him into a spree that lasted for 8 months, during which he stole almost $30,000, evading capture by changing his appearance with each robbery. Ryan's confidence grew with each successful heist. He began dressing in increasingly ridiculous outfits, including his trademark fake beard, which was meant to confuse the police and make him more difficult to identify. He became so bold that he started to believe that he was untouchable. However, despite his cunning, Ryan's luck would eventually run out. In the summer of 2008, after robbing a dozen banks, the police finally managed to catch him. Ryan's trial was an emotional roller coaster, as his friends and colleagues expressed their shock over his actions, emphasizing that the crimes were a desperate reaction to his financial struggles, not a reflection of his true character. Despite his remorse, the judge was lenient, acknowledging Ryan's lack of a criminal history and his apparent distress over his actions. Ryan was sentenced to just under 4 years in prison, a sentence many felt was too light given the gravity of his crimes. However, in 2010, just 2 years into his sentence, Ryan was granted parole, and he returned home to his parents, seemingly ready for a fresh start. But reintegrating into society after prison proved to be more challenging than Ryan had anticipated. Life outside of prison was complicated by his criminal record, and he struggled to find stable work. This left him facing the same financial difficulties that had contributed to his criminal behavior in the first place. To make matters worse, the stigma of his past followed him everywhere he went. Ryan's family was embarrassed by his actions, and the constant gossip from neighbors only added to the strain. Desperate for a fresh start, Ryan and his family moved to a different neighborhood, hoping to escape the whispers of their past. Still, his debt remained, and without a steady income, he was forced to declare bankruptcy. His dreams of a stable, successful life seemed to be slipping further and further away. It was around this time that Ryan's life took another turn. In 2015, he proposed to his girlfriend Kristen, a woman he had met while working toward a biophysics degree he had falsely claimed to have completed. Kristen, who lived a life Ryan envied, stable, financially secure, and socially respected, had accepted him despite his criminal past. Ryan was drawn to her not only because of her love and understanding but because she represented everything he had ever wanted, a perfect life. In an attempt to make his life seem even more flawless, Ryan fabricated a story about graduating from the University of Toronto and securing a job at a prestigious tech company. In reality, he had dropped out of school, and the job he claimed to have been offered was never even a possibility. As the wedding approached, the web of lies Ryan had carefully constructed started to unravel. When his mother, Susan, began to suspect that something was wrong and threatened to expose his lies to his fiancée, Ryan found himself cornered. The emotional toll of his deceptions became too much for Ryan to bear. His guilt and fear of being exposed began to consume him. He could not bear the thought of Kristen finding out the truth and abandoning him. In a moment of desperation, Ryan decided to take extreme measures. Rather than confessing his lies, he chose to murder the very person who was closest to him, his mother. He saw her as the final obstacle to his perfect life, and in his disturbed mind, eliminating her would ensure that his secrets remained hidden. On August 25, 2017, Ryan went to his mother's house under the pretense of helping her with household tasks. After a heated argument about his lies, he murdered her in cold blood. But the crime did not end there. When his older brother, Christopher, arrived to intervene, Ryan killed him too. His younger brother, Alexander, arrived shortly after and was also killed by Ryan. The only survivor was Leyland, another brother, who narrowly escaped and managed to seek help from a neighbor. When police arrived, they found Ryan calmly sitting outside his house, drinking water, as though he had no remorse for his actions. He was arrested and later pled guilty to the murders of his mother, Christopher, and Alexander. At his trial, Ryan expressed deep remorse for his actions, but it was clear that the web of lies, the pressure to maintain a facade, and the emotional breakdown he had experienced played a significant role in his descent into violence. Ryan was sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of parole for 25 years. The surviving family members, particularly Leyland, were left to deal with the emotional aftermath of the brutal killings. Leyland's life was forever altered by the events of that day, and the trauma of losing his brothers and mother in such a horrific manner would stay with him for the rest of his life. The once promising young man who had been admired by many for his charm and kindness was now a convicted murderer, his future forever overshadowed by his tragic choices. Brett Ryan's story serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of living a life built on deception. His inability to confront his financial struggles and the lies he told to cover them up ultimately led to the loss of his family, his freedom, and his future. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of maintaining a facade at the cost of one's mental and emotional well-being, and how the pursuit of perfection can sometimes lead to the destruction of everything one holds dear. As we reflect on the three remarkable stories we've encountered, it's impossible not to marvel at the unpredictable nature of life itself. From the shocking deception of Brett Ryan, once the fake Bearded Bandit, to the deeply unsettling events that shaped the lives of those involved, it becomes clear that fate often operates in ways beyond our comprehension. These stories, each bizarre in their own right, remind us how the truth, no matter how strange, can be even more confounding than fiction. At the heart of each narrative lies the theme of unpredictability. For Brett Ryan, what started as a series of small lies about his career and education spiraled into a chain of violent, irreversible actions that not only destroyed his family but ultimately condemned him to life in prison. His need to maintain an illusion of success, despite his mounting financial troubles, led him to a tragic and senseless act of murder. How is it possible that someone so charming and seemingly well-intentioned could fall so far? It's a haunting question that underscores the randomness of human choices, and just how fragile the line between good intentions and catastrophic decisions can be. Then there's Mitch, whose life, as perfect as it seemed, was abruptly unraveled by something as simple as a blurry lamp. His gradual descent into a hallucinatory nightmare turned his family into nothing more than figments of his mind. A decade of a life that appeared full of love and joy turned out to be a complex psychological trap. What is more bewildering than realizing that everything you believed to be true, everything that defined your happiness, was nothing more than a fragile illusion? And finally, the tragic story of Jim Stoffer and the horrendous betrayal of his mother's body by a so-called biological resource sender. Trust, once broken, led to a sinister turn of events, revealing a level of greed and disregard for human dignity that defies reason. Jim, in his moment of grief, believed he was doing something noble by donating his mother's body for research, only to find that his trust had been exploited for profit, with devastating consequences. It's a reminder that sometimes, even in death, we are not immune to the whims of a world that operates on unpredictable forces. These stories converge on a central truth: life is full of unexpected twists that no one can predict. We might think we can control our destinies, but in reality, we are often at the mercy of forces much larger than ourselves. The lies we tell, the choices we make, the people we trust, each of these plays a role in shaping our fate in ways that are often beyond our control. Truth, it seems, has its own agenda, one that doesn't always make sense and sometimes reveals itself in the most unsettling ways. As we ponder the mysteries of these strange events, it's worth considering how often our own lives are shaped by forces we don't fully understand. How many times have we been caught in situations that seemed random, or been faced with challenges that defied all logic? The truth is, life is far stranger and more unpredictable than we often realize. Perhaps the greatest lesson we can take away from these stories is the reminder that we don't always have to make sense of everything. Sometimes, embracing the mystery, whether it's the strange turns our own lives take or the unfathomable decisions others make, is the best way to cope with the unpredictable nature of fate. So, as we close, take a moment to think about your own life. Have you ever experienced a twist of fate that defied explanation? What mysteries surround you, and how have they shaped the person you are today? These questions may never have clear answers, but one thing is for sure: life's unpredictability is what makes it fascinating, even when it's dark and bewildering.